Hello, everyone, and welcome to the webcast. My name is Christine Dorsey Davis. I'm the Executive Director of the Ohio Chapter of the American Planning Association, and I am your webcast moderator. Today is Tuesday, November 24th. We will hear the presentation, Better Public Engagement. For content questions related to the presentation, you can type those in your chat box, questions box located in your webinar toolbar. We will answer those at the end of the presentation during the Q&A. If you have any technical issues, you can type those in as well, and I'll do my best to try to help you with those. Coming up next on your screen is a list of our sponsoring APA chapters and divisions for 2020. Thanks to all of those participating sponsors for making these webcasts possible and free to members. Today we are sponsored by the Mid-Atlantic Planning Collaboration, which is a joint venture of the Maryland National Capital Area, Virginia, and West Virginia chapters, along with the Maryland Department of Planning, Maryland Planning Commissioners Association, the Rural Planning Caucus of Virginia, and West Virginia University's Land Use and Sustainable Development Law Clinic. The intent of this joint venture is to address topics that may be of interest to people involved in planning at all levels across multiple regions. So thanks to you for sponsoring today's session. And they actually have a series of sessions, and you can see them up here on your screen. Head over to ohioplanning.org/planningwebcast, and that's where you can register for all of our upcoming sessions that we have. Everything you see on your screen is what we have left for 2020. Believe it or not, we're already scheduling sessions for 2021. So be sure to head over to our webcast webpage to check all those out and to register for sessions. Get to my next slide here. Today's webcast has been approved for 1.5 CM credits for live viewing. To log your AICP CM credits, just head over to planning.org, log into your My APA account, and from there you can either search by today's title or event number, both of which can be found on our webcast webpage. Be sure to like us on Facebook, just search Planning Webcast Series and we'll pop up. That's where I post any important or timely information like a date or time change for one of our sessions, or when we have new sessions available for you to register for. So be sure to like us there. And also we record all of our sessions and we post them on our YouTube channel. So head over to YouTube, again, just search Planning Webcast Series. We'll pop up along with our over 300 recorded sessions. We have over 3,100 subscribers right now. So be sure to join us so that you get up-to-date information when one of our session recordings posts. So that's the end of my housekeeping. Again, if you have questions, be sure to type them in the chat box in your webcast toolbar. And with that, I am going to turn it over to our first presenter. Let me get that going here. Neil, I have just changed those controls over to you.
Okay, thank you. And I will get up my presentation. All right, looks like we're ready to go. So good afternoon from Pennsylvania. It's great to be here today, and thanks for having me on this engagement webinar. Before I get started, I'll give a brief introduction and background of myself, and then I'm going to talk about some different engagement tools that Penn State provides and some of the projects that we've worked on, and give you kind of a combination of those things. So as mentioned, my name is Neil Fogel. I'm a community and economic development educator with Penn State Extension. My background is right out of college. I was a land use planner in the Bloomsburg area, which is kind of central Pennsylvania, a little bit to the east of central PA. But I was in Columbia County. I did land use planning there for for about 2 years. Then I did land use planning in Lycoming County, which is Williamsport area, South Williamsport area. So I got to see Little League World Series area a good bit. Then actually I went back to Columbia County as planning director. I was planning director for about 13 years. After that, I started my work with Extension. I've been with Extension for a little over 19 years now. My work with Extension, I deal with a lot of the same issues that I did when I was actually in planning, but now it's more of the education side of things, or providing assistance, as opposed to the actual day-to-day type of planning roles. So I enjoyed both, but I really do like the education part of it as well. And in part, I think that experience from the hands-on for all those years, and then from the research and education side, it's really interesting looking at the engagement and how it's changed over the years, but how it's so important, and how some folks do it really well, some folks not so well. When I was with county planning in Pennsylvania, our local municipalities have more control when it comes to land use than counties. So my role was to create different land use regulations and ordinances at the county level, as well as plans like a comprehensive plan, but also we reviewed and assisted local municipalities as well. So of course there was public engagement. Well, sometimes I don't know if I'd actually call it engagement. There were public meetings for some of those. So again, there's a lot of different ways of looking at it, and I'll hopefully try to share some of my experiences from that today. So in my role with Extension, basically Extension does three main things when it comes to almost any subject, but this would include public engagement. Extension is basically that. It's an extension of the university. So Penn State Extension is an extension of the research and a lot of the expertise and faculty that have some extension appointments at the university. There's a representation of extension in every county in Pennsylvania. We provide education for folks at the local level, county level, state, sometimes federal, depending on the subject, or it's a lot of different groups that we deal with as well. I have dealt with nonprofits, I deal a lot with local government, and kind of give some different perspectives. It's really nice that a lot of these issues, just like public engagement. I mean, initially, I think you would think of government or planning, but it also has to do with organizations as well. So a lot of the concepts are the same. A lot of the techniques are the same, but applied in different ways. So for extension, for the one side, the education and resources, and that's one of the things I'm going to go over today. One of the things I hope to add today is, obviously in the amount of time here, it can only cover so much, but I'll give out a lot of information as far as links or websites that you can go to get additional information, and then we link it even to a lot more that you can look at and look for more detail on your own. But we do a lot of articles, publications, as well as actual meetings, trainings. We've changed over time. We don't do as many face-to-face. Obviously, now we're not doing. We're doing very limited face-to-face. But even without the COVID issue, that's kind of changed over time just by the technological switches that have gone on. The other part of extension is research. We do research on particular items, and I'm going to share some research and follow-up types of application of that when it comes to public engagement in a little bit. And in some cases, we actually provide assistance, the hands-on. If we provide training, or if there's an actual request to say, community saying, hey, we really need help with walking through this engagement strategy, or walking through whether it's like a land use issue or something like that. We're not out there to make the decisions for organizations, but we help walk them through it and give them information relative to that. That's one of the other big things with extension is, we're a non-biased organization. So a lot of times we'll go in and do facilitation so that we're, not taking one side or another. We're not viewed as taking one side or another. So one of the ways you can get this information relative to whether it's public engagement or other things, you can visit our website, and here is the address for that. different ways you can go about it, but if you just like type in the subject area you're interested in, you can search for it that way, or on the site there's a lot of pull down menus. You can look for the particular issue or area that you're interested in getting information for. For this audience, I will mention we do a monthly land use webinar series. That might be of some interest to you as well, so please feel free to look into that as well if you're interested. So these articles that I'm going to cover here briefly are on that site, but I just want to give some examples of the types of publications or articles that are out there that can help, and in this particular instance, certainly for community engagement. For example, one is for community engagement online options and critical times. This article covers one of the big things that you really need to think about for public engagement is that what's your goal in it? You know, I think unfortunately a lot of public engagement efforts are, well, this says we have to have a public meeting or public hearing, so do the advertisement, we'll meet where we usually meet, and that's it. And go out and say, you know, XYZ of the plan or whatever, and here's the information. That's not really engagement. It's education, but it's not engagement. But you really want to think about what specific goals do you want for it? Is it more than just getting information out there if you really truly want engagement? Also, as is covered in this article, or what are your strategies? Are they going to work for your particular audience? You know, you don't want to have it in a place where people aren't going to show, or you're not going to have it use a method that, well, if it's something online that you know most of the people there don't have broadband or other access. So again, some of the things you want to think about, and I'll talk about how to develop an engagement plan a little later, but again, that's covered in that article. Another article I thought, or I think would be pretty applicable, is the online engagement resources and strategies. Again, this talks about, is it really engagement or is it just communication or education for your efforts that you're going through? And one of the nice things with this article, it'll link you to some other resources. One is the International Association of Public Participation, and there's also a National Coalition on Dialogue and Democracy, and there's some links in there that can get you to those folks as well. The last example I have here is understanding community engagement. It talks about, again, going beyond that one-way communication. It also talks about all the benefits of public engagement. Again, I think a lot of times we get into the routine of going through that process because we have to. Whether you have to or not, you really should think about what are you going to get out of it. You know, there's a lot of benefits, excuse me, to public engagement. You can build local networks. You can enhance relationships. You can avoid conflict. If you can get information out there and have it talked through and people understand it, it's a way of avoiding conflict. Also, it can help with improved decision making. Certainly, is another part of public engagement. And another really important one, and I know I'll touch on this again, but just to increase trust. When you look at the studies, the trust in government and organizations really has dropped over the years. And it's really hard to do engagement when there's not trust. And true, effective engagement really helps to build that trust up there for your projects and for the efforts that you do. One of the other sites I would like to share that I think would provide a lot of good information for you, there is a Penn State Center for Economic and Community Development. It's my understanding you're going to get these slides, so you'll have all the links and whatnot that you can look at it. But this center basically does applied research, so it's not just doing the research, it's how to apply it and helping people apply it. And it's to help strengthen local and regional development, not only in Pennsylvania, but beyond Pennsylvania. Some of the things on this site, there's a lot of COVID-19 resources on there, a lot of publications relative to economic trends and impact, and one of the really big tiers upon which it's built is public and community engagement. So there's a lot of information on there about that. And one of the really key things on this site is a community engagement toolkit. So this slide, again, here's the address for it, but this is the component of the site as far as actual community engagement. But there's different things that are covered on this, including why engagement matters. I did a really quick scenario of that earlier, but why it matters. Also some guiding principles, and I think these are important enough just to take a minute here to go through them. So there's 5 basic guiding principles for successful community engagement. One of which, or the first, is certainly to increase citizens' knowledge about a community or the issue that they're dealing with. But the second is to encourage the citizens to co-create additional knowledge and apply that knowledge that you gave by that effort. And then next, or third, is to use that knowledge to improve the community or to address a specifically identified problem. And then also create future opportunities for future engagement as a result of your efforts. And then finally, ensure that the opportunities and the effective communications become a regular and ongoing part of the process. It doesn't just end, that there's partnerships developed, that it continues on beyond the project itself. The other part that is important on the site, there's a lot of, as I mentioned, there's a lot of links to other resources, and there's a section on building trust, how you can build trust within your organization or your agency. And there's a section also on planning your education or your engagement efforts. One of the things on this site, and I know this is something that takes a little time, but it's good to work your way through it. Again, I think for engagement, a lot of times it's thought out, but it's not documented, or it's not gone through like an actual plan. Again, my background's in planning. Now with extension, I not only do planning related things when it relates to government and planning agencies, but also strategic plans and whatnot. So, we plan for so many things, but engagement is something actually you plan for and document what you're going to do. Do you evaluate, was it effective or not? Or do you say, oh, wow, I'm glad that's over with, let's move on to the next project. But on that website that I showed to you, I think one of the really helpful things is there's an engagement plan worksheet. And it leads you through the different steps of issues that you would want to consider for your engagement effort. I'll just touch on these as I go through these. The first issue on there is to define the issue. What is the actual specific problem? What's the goal that you really want to address? Is it just checking that check mark that, okay, we had our meeting and now we're done, so now we can adopt it if we want to? Or is it actually to get more feedback, to have a better decision-making process? So again, to define the issue, it could be maybe one of the big issues could be youth curfews. Well, the bigger issue, when you reframe it or look at it from a different perspective, could just be enhancing youth opportunities. So there's different ways of framing an issue that are out there, and that's, again, something you want to consider. The next step is the engagement goals. Again, what are your specific goals? Do you just want to inform people, or do you want to collaborate with them or empower them as part of the process? And that would be how you built your actual plan. Next step will be to develop an engagement team. You'd want to have a diverse group of people there. Think about who do we want attending this meeting. Representatives of those groups are the ones that you would want on your engagement team, because they will know how to reach out to those that they deal with a lot. Certainly then you need to think about what tools do you want to use. Think about face-to-face as well as digital tools. Again, and the tool you're going to choose is going to be very dependent on what you want, what your overall goal is for the project. So if it's just to inform, survey or just a public hearing where you give information out is one thing. If you want to collaborate, you might want to do task forces, or you might want to do like a study circle, which is where usually 8 to 10 people look at an issue and meet multiple times and get a little further as they go through the process. So that's more of the empowerment or more of the collaborative side of things. Next, to identify your stakeholders who are, is it just a broad brush and whoever comes, or you want to focus on particular stakeholders? The final steps in the plan would be to do a participant recruitment and retention plan, not only how you're going to reach them, but how you're going to communicate with the target audience. Then also you want to create a positive environment for citizens and stakeholder input. So what type of information would you have here? What types of processes? How would you make it welcoming, that they feel like they can actually come in and state their mind and give their opinions? Again, I think it's really important to identify your projects, because if you don't evaluate it, how are you really going to know if it was successful or not, if you want to repeat it or not? So think about doing an actual evaluation plan of your engagement efforts. And then this last one relates to one of the 5 criteria earlier, is maintain open lines of communication, not only through the project, but how can there be some communication later on as well? Another booklet that's out there, and this one relates somewhat to research as well, but there's a handbook on community engagement for collective action. And this was done by a collaboration of people, but 2 of which include extension educators. But this in part was based on some work done in Australia for invasive species, but the book itself applies to any types of projects. So again, this is available for you. Some of the actual meetings that we have held, just some examples, or the types of training. One, running professional meetings, how to avoid conflict related to that. So you have guidelines, but yet you want people to be able to speak, but you don't want to make them feel like they're intimidated so much that they can't. How do the members themselves conduct themselves? Things like that. It's also important when laws change. In Pennsylvania, we had a legislative update that let municipalities make more decisions than they previously could through the web. So we had a session on that. And then a session basically applying a lot of the principles I had talked about for positive public involvement and engagement. What are some things you want to think about? How do you engage people that they will attend, and that they also, again, are comfortable providing that and feel like they are making a difference? Otherwise, a lot of them aren't going to attend at all. In regard to research, this publication was also from some research that was done through some key interviews with key people across Pennsylvania, as well as looking at what the existing research shows. This is available. This is a little bit dated, but it's still, a lot of the concepts are still spot on. So basically, it's an overview of citizen engagement, then how to develop a citizen engagement plan, list some different options for you that you can use. And then again, there's that link to additional resources if you want to find more additional information. So 3 projects that we have worked on that I will just touch on. One of which was the Union County, Pennsylvania Comprehensive Plan. Extension help for some of the aspects, certainly not all of them, but Union County, actually, they received an award for this plan, particularly with some of the outreach that they did with it. But I thought it was really unique. The way that they kicked off their comprehensive plan engagement efforts for the public as a whole was they actually held it at a local campus theater, which is well attended. It's like an old theater that was revised, and a lot of people like to go there. So they actually had it there. They actually had, Bucknell is the university that's in Union County. They had the pep band gather there. They actually provided music for people that came. They had a speaker, and that drew over 200 people to the first meeting. So I think that's a really good turnout. Also, prior to this, there were some outreach efforts, and I had helped with this one. Presentations on what is a comprehensive plan and what's in it for me. Let's face, a lot of times these days, unless people think it's going to benefit them in some way, they may not be involved in it. But that was some of that training. Again, what is a comp plan? What's in it for me? The other unique thing I think that was done for that one, there was some youth involvement. We did a land use related and then community planning type program for the middle school youth. They actually developed communities on their own, what they thought some good ideas would be. And then they were actually given the survey that the public was given so that they could have a youth side of it and compare what the youth said to the rest of the county. The other interesting thing I thought they did, they actually have some of their meetings were around Thanksgiving, and they did Let's Talk Turkey giveaways. So I actually had, like, for some local farmers, they would give out certificates to every so many people to get a turkey to draw people, and again, it seemed to work pretty well. The other ones would be for Susquehanna Depot, which was done recently. This program is for a multi-generational planning to look at features of the community, how different age groups think about it, and what can be done in the future. This one was through a grant from AARP, and we're still finishing this one up. But basically, the way that we went through this one was we developed a community action committee, and there was some local champions, as we call them, that are really energetic and are willing to put the time and effort in. And I will say, I think that's one of the key things for any local effort is to have those local folks who are willing to spread the word for you and have those connections. So that's extremely important. But then we did a community assessment, which is basically a Qualtrics survey. And it worked out pretty well. There's a community event going on that we combined, like getting the word out on this project as well. And the other thing that really seemed to draw people, there's a community Facebook page that people use a lot in that community that helped to get people out. We did have a kickoff meeting with folks that were invited from all these different means, from word of mouth to Facebook, connections through schools and whatnot. And we had those people help recruit others to complete a survey on the community itself. Once we got all the survey information, we had an action plan for them, and that was totally online from our side. There were some small local groups, but most of it were folks that were online. And we did that via Zoom, and we also used Jamboard as far as getting some ideas together. And one of the things I think we could have done a little better after we did it was use more of the Zoom features of polls to get some feedback, but it seemed to work pretty well. There were some glitches certainly we had to work out, particularly with the number of ideas that were submitted. But again, it was a good alternative when you can't do it face to face. The last one, the Smithton-Scottdale Active Transportation Plan. This one of my colleagues, John Turak, worked with, and I can certainly put you in contact with him if you want a lot of details about it. Again, the URL is here for the website. You can look it over, but a lot of public meetings, a lot of advisory boards. One of the things that they did that really, I think, got them good information using Survey 123. This is an active transportation plan, and people will go out biking, and then if they saw something that, hey, this really needs changed, they would get in their phone, mark it down, it would map where they were, they could take a picture of it, and then make their comments as well. So with that, here's my contact information. So again, my understanding is you'll be getting a copy of the PowerPoint. So thanks for your time, and I'm going to turn it over. I'm going to try to turn it over, my best to turn it over to Bill.
Thank you very much, Neil. I greatly appreciated your presentation, and I would like to really emphasize the preparation and taking stock of your public involvement as you move forward. I think is an important and key point that we all tend to overlook. It's very easy to go into, I've checked off that box, let's move on. So I really appreciated your comments. Thank you.
Thanks.
So I guess where I will go from here is I will go ahead and do an introduction, and then we'll get into our presentation. I'm Bill Austin, the Executive Director of the Morgantown Monongalia Metropolitan Planning Organization, MPO. I've been the Executive Director since 2009. My previous experience, well, let's start with education. I have a bachelor's and master's degree in political science from Virginia Tech, which is very odd since I'm actually working at the home of West Virginia University. And I have worked as the primary planner for 2 different MPOs in North Carolina. And I have done public involvement, primarily coordinating with MPOs in South Florida on behalf of Florida's Turnpike. So I made the reverse move. I came to West Virginia from Florida. So we're a little bit unusual in that aspect. My topic today is going to be the 2013 update of the MPO's long-range transportation plan. And so we did in 2013, we were due to update our long-range transportation plan. And at the same time, this is Monongalia County. The MPO's area covers the entirety of Monongalia County, but as you can see, most of it is rural. The primary urban area you see is housed around Morgantown, with small towns, Star City, Granville, and Westover immediately adjacent to Morgantown. All of the urban areas, municipalities, and Monongalia County's comprehensive plans are essentially required to be updated around the same time. The city of Morgantown is the largest municipality with 30,000 residents, and none of the smaller municipalities have a population of greater than 3,500. The crossroads effort that I'm discussing today was an idea of our Transportation Technical Advisory Committee. When we were discussing the MPO's need to update our long-range transportation plan, we determined it was a great time to try and achieve one of the goals of land use and transportation planning, which is to actually update our comprehensive plans and our transportation plans at the same time and actually coordinate them. We reached out to all of the urban areas, municipalities, Star City, Westover, Granville, and of course the city of Morgantown and Monongalia County to see if they wanted to join into our collaborative effort. Only 2 of our municipalities joined into the effort, the city of Morgantown and the town of Star City. In addition to our municipalities, as I mentioned earlier, Morgantown includes West Virginia University, which is the 800-pound gorilla in the room, as well as we have major employers with Mylan Pharmaceuticals and 2 federal agencies, NETL, National Energy Laboratory, and the National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health, NIOSH. So we have a fairly compact urban area with a fairly well-educated population, but we're also an area that has a substantial underserved and underrepresented community within it. The project purpose we had was to update our urban area long-range transportation plan, update the municipal comprehensive plans, and really the most important part, and being a political scientist, I guess this is my bread and butter, is to work to develop a community consensus on transportation and land use issues. Morgantown had a long history of being divided on transportation issues. The Division of Highways, West Virginia Division of Highways, which is part of the Department of Transportation, would propose one project and be ready to move forward. And then a faction within our area would go to Charleston, the state capital, and say, we don't want that project, and ultimately get a project killed. So the ambitious goal of this crossroads effort was to help create a community consensus on transportation land use issues. Our public involvement process would look to develop a shared vision using multiple opportunities for involvement by all of the important stakeholders and the larger community. We had ongoing efforts. We had an online presence. We had newspaper articles, ads on the transit system, radio interviews, email blasts. We also conducted a survey, which was advertised by all of those means, and you could take it online. And we augmented that with a very extensive program of traditional meetings. We had stakeholder interviews. We had idea gathering workshops. What was the public's idea of what our concerns were? We had a workshop on understanding future growth and where that should be developed. And then we had a community choices workshop where we actually looked at those ideas that came forward and developing some priorities on that. Our first set of public meetings were the idea gathering meeting, and those were actually two hands-on workshops, one held on a Wednesday and one on a Thursday in different parts of the urban area, one in the north part of the urban area and one in the south. We had over 100 participants in our ideas gathering meetings, and our stakeholder interviews, we interviewed over 100 persons, consisting of everybody from WVU faculty and staff, as well as management, to local developers, to a wide range of influential persons within the community. And from there, we developed our goals and vision statement. Once we did that, we had an idea of understanding future growth. For a transportation plan, you really need to understand what you're going to be planning for in the future. And we wanted the public input as well as input from our elected officials and developers on how that growth was going to occur. That was also a hands-on workshop where we actually went through a strengths and weaknesses identification within the area with mapping, and I'll show you some pictures from some of these meetings in just a minute. So we had 50 participants in the Understanding Future Growth exercise, which since it was a hands-on workshop, was a very good turnout. And from there, we developed the principles and regional vision. Here are some of the exercises we went through. We literally held this meeting in a high school, and we had breakout sessions for facilitated work on what we saw the community going through. It was very informal, but yet we took note of every comment we received. We viewed our comments as being gold. It's hard to get people to participate in these activities, especially to take a night off in the middle of the week, but we developed a large range of a large community consensus through these methods. And these are the identified strengths and weaknesses of our area as identified by the participants. The comments and suggestions and ideas we got were numerous. As you can see, transportations and alternative transportation was, since we were doing a transportation plan, a key priority, but development and growth, as you can see, was also a very important thing. The other thing, getting things done, which came down as the tied for third with traffic as being a concern, really reflected the community's lack of consensus on what needs to be done. As I mentioned, we had an issue, and it will never go away, of folks going down to Charleston and saying they do or do not like a transportation project and getting them killed. And so the community consensus was an important idea. Then we had a community choices public workshop. We basically bound up everything that we did in the previous steps, came up with goals and objectives, came up with ideas for projects, and we went to the public and asked them to express their opinions on those ideas. We had 40 participants into that meeting, and it was very well received. I do want to point out, though, that we did mention the comprehensive planning processes that were going on surrounded by land use. Our same consulting team worked with the individual municipalities on that, and they had steering committees for their comprehensive plans. This effort did not develop or drive the comprehensive plans for the city of Morgantown and Star City, what we did was we got input from their comprehensive plans into developing the consensus for our transportation plan. And I want to make that point really strongly. Each community was in charge of its own comprehensive plan. Control of their own destiny is important to all of these small governments, and we respect that. So I wanted to make that known that we took the input from their comprehensive plans and fed it into our transportation plan. And here were a lot of the understanding future growth. And here's some of the, just some of the ideas that were put forward that came from our regional vision. Manage growth that is efficient and attractive, supported by appropriate infrastructure. A balanced, safe, and attractive transportation system will reduce congestion. Leadership that embraces continued community engagement and stronger collaboration among municipalities, the county, and the state, and WVU. I'm not going to show you all of these vision statements. In fact, the presentation that you should get a copy of has a lot more of these principles in it, but I wanted to show you the ideas that came from our community involvement. We brought these ideas forward and got comments on them, and we got strong support from the community that these were ideas that we needed to move forward. Development that integrates misuse and connects with the existing urban fabric. Environmentally sensitive and sustainable practice will be encouraged. And the results we got were a regional growth framework. This is the result of our public outreach and how people identified the future for our urban area within the greater setting of Monongalia County. As you can see, the red highlighted areas are areas where growth is to be encouraged. We have infill and redevelopment encouraged. This is primarily in the city of Morgantown and the town of Westover. And we anticipate controlled growth. These areas are areas that were already growing, and we sought to keep that growth going, but have it controlled in a manner that is best for the community. You will note that a lot of those are out in Monongalia County, which did not participate in our comprehensive planning effort, but they did participate in our transportation planning effort. And we did coordinate with their comprehensive planning effort, even though it was not part of the same ongoing process. We also came up with a multimodal regional transportation plan with prioritized projects that looked at everything from bus rapid transit, which is kind of amazing for an area as small as we are, to bicycle and pedestrian improvements, as well as multi-use paths and a large variety of projects. So what were the results of our effort? We got an updated comprehensive plan for the city of Morgantown and for Star City. We had an updated long-range transportation plan with consensus between the decision makers and the public. Out of that effort, we've gotten 4 major projects scheduled and underway, and many smaller projects have also been implemented that in the past could have easily been killed by someone going to Charleston and saying, I don't like this project. That still happens, but we also are able to present a community consensus that the project should move forward. And I will say in closing that the effort really has been successful. As I noted in the Crossroads plan, we only got 2 of our municipalities to participate with the MPO. And we are now in the process of developing an RFQ for a major update of our metropolitan transportation plan. And we do have the agreement to participate of Monongalia County and all of the small communities in the core of the urban area. So I believe what we were able to demonstrate through this process is that you could have a collaborative regional decision-making process where our smaller communities were respected. And if you're a consultant, you should probably look for that RFQ to come out shortly. We believe it was a very successful effort, but if you look, it was intrinsically by far the most effort we put into the development of our metropolitan transportation plan and these comprehensive plans. We feel it was well worth it, and making sure you have outreach to all of your communities are really vital to making sure that you actually get things done. And with that, I'll be happy to move on to any questions, or thank you very much. So now I need to turn the screen over back to Neil. Bear with me. Thank you, Neil.
And Ron, if you want to go ahead and jump in with some of your concluding thoughts, introduce yourself. And Ron, if you're speaking, we cannot hear you. You need to unmute yourself, please.
Am I on now?
Yes, you are.
Okay, hi. I just had to step away for a second, so somebody was at the door. I'm on now.
Yes, you are.
Sorry, I can't because of our hardware. I can't get my camera to work. I think really, again, appreciate the presentations and a lot of good information there. Just so a little brief introduction to myself. I started this public participation process right out of architecture school in the 1960s, went into the Peace Corps and got more interested in community than architecture, and came back and became a planner. Retired from being regional planning director in Chicago about 10 years ago, and I've been in Athens, Georgia since, teaching at the university and writing, still staying involved with the public participation process. One of the things I had mentioned to my fellow panelists before, we got the APA National Planning Award for our regional plan in 2007 in Chicago, especially for its regional public participation. And one of the things I said at the acceptance of that honored recognition was my colleagues and I around the country have been doing public participation, and it goes back to Paul Davidoff in the 60s, a great public participation advocate that's still out there. Ron Schiffman started the Center for Community Development and Design at Pratt that still exists. So this stuff has been a part of our planning profession and toolkit now for 70, 50 plus years. One of my questions is, why is it still getting awards for being an innovation? Why isn't it a norm? I really do think the public in our democratic system is both stockholders. They pay the taxes. They're board members. They elect the people that are going to work on stuff, and they, as we've been talking about, are also a participating partner. I have been somewhat critical of APA in all of the planning reports, the PAS reports that started in 1947, 48. think we're up to about 500 and some, and only recently did one of our colleagues, Milton Hurd in Virginia, actually get the opportunity to write a PAS report on being a facilitator. So there's been a lot of talk about it, but I don't think it really has had the seriousness that it has had in other fields like healthcare, the social services, sort of the community development world that's only on the perimeter of what APA recognizes as planning. Also, I've been one of the early advocates back into the late 70s and 80s for using technology to help us in our outreach. I did a package back in the 90s for APA on using television. And of course, the internet has really exploded in its potentiality and tools. One of my concerns is that we get better at integrating both face-to-face interaction and engagement with some of the new technology tools. It seems that too often, I guess it's because who's working on it, it tends to be one or the other. I've been doing some webinars and I recommend them to everybody. I don't know if my colleagues have connected with them, but there's a Vancouver, Canada group called MetroQuest. Since I don't have any visuals, it's MetroQuest, one word with a capital M and a capital Q. They're doing some very good webinars, free webinars on their technology tools. They have some incredibly, I think, interesting, affordable, usable tools where you can do survey interviews on people's iPhones, smartphones. But one of my other concerns is excuse me, in the last 10 years, especially, that's before pandemics and all of our quarantines, I think I've seen too many of our colleagues. Now, often I'll have to say, no hard accusations intended, but a lot of the, and I'll go back, my Chicago agency was a part of the MPO process. So also worked on a lot of regional transportation planning in the Chicago region. And in those networks, it seems a lot of our, especially transportation planning, is using more and more open house activities. Nothing against open houses where people can drop in about any time and put some ideas in a suggestion box. But I've been seeing too many projects, I think, that is their public participation, not the kind of engagement we've heard about this morning from Bill and Neil. So I think coming out of this pandemic will be a big challenge to kind of re-energize public participation, both face-to-face and some of the remote tools. And I was glad to hear, I think it was Neil that mentioned differentiating between engagement that's sort of, I'll call it drop-in or a one-time survey and even showing up for a meeting versus setting up like working groups, task forces, things like that, where not just officials, but interested public can stay involved as part of the working process as the plan develops. So I think we have an enormous set of potentials out there, and we'll be anxious to see how those begin to be reactivated as we come out of the pandemic quarantines. I think we've heard a lot of information today. And I think those are some of my main concerns and comments. So one more, there's always one more. I just asked Neil, and I'll ask whoever's out there listening to take a look if you're not in the university academic setting, because I've seen very, very few in my 50+ year career, and a lot of dropping in and out of universities, and now having been on a faculty, very, very few courses that are actually have a syllabus and a title related to public engagement. And I think it's actually a quandary, since it's such an important planning function. Why is it still such a kind of a perimeter adjunct in our education of planners? Thank you for the opportunity. I'm really glad to see the subject coming up, and APA doing programs like this. So thank you, and I'm already signed up for another one of your webcasts in early December on urban design and presentation.
Great, thank you. And Neil and Bill, if you want to go ahead and turn your webcams back on and we can answer some questions. The first one here is going to be for Bill. What do you think was the biggest factor in getting good turnout to the meetings? And then maybe we'll turn to Neil to answer the same question.
Publicity, plus we were fortunate. We have a very well-educated community that people are really interested in these issues. Being a university town, and as you noted, we have two, or I noted, we have two research facilities, NIOSH and Nettle. But also transportation is a real quandary in Morgantown. A lot of our road right-of-ways are very narrow, and it's hard to have improvement projects that don't take out houses, those sorts of issues. And we have congestion. I actually moved here from Orlando. We had congestion that was, in some instances, comparable to some of the stuff I saw in Orlando. Now, overall, it was nothing compared to Orlando, but it was a real issue for our public.
Neil?
Yeah, if you want, I guess I would say, I mean, agree with what Bill said. To me, and I think I mentioned this before, if you have that local connection, that local champion, so to speak, that's going to be that good ambassador for your project or for getting people out, that's really key. And I think if you can also get some type of task force or citizen advisory group, because they, those folks know what's going on locally, particularly in a bigger area where there's kind of subsections of a large metropolitan or other area. It's really interesting. I was looking at actually some of the comments from the advisory board on that Smithton Scottsdale project that I had put up. And just some of the responses from that advisory board just amazed me how knowledgeable they were of whether it's local events, whether it was Facebook community pages. I mean, that's really big right now. Also, somebody had made a comment. There's an app that the municipality was using called, I never heard of it before, Savvy Citizen, but they actually used that to promote the project and getting people out. So I think that's some important things. And one of the things that came out, this is from that one research project, often is just to run it. It's very helpful to run professional meetings so people come back, or so they feel that they're getting something out of it, and that's really key too.
Okay, thank you. Next one, question for Bill. You use the term consensus frequently. How do you define consensus, and how do you know you have achieved it?
It is very difficult to define consensus, because consensus implies that everyone agrees. Well, it's not really everyone agreeing. There are always going to be differing shades of opinion and commitment to the ideas or the plan that you're working on. What we identified as consensus was that there was an understanding within the elected officials and the broader community that you could seriously see reflected in the responses to projects. We have a project that's an installation of a roundabout at a problem intersection. And the property owners went to Charleston and said, we don't want this project. Obviously, they didn't want their property to be taken. I won't go into the issues. But we actually had champions who were involved in the planning process come forward and say, no, this is what the community wants. And they were willing to write letters to Charleston and express their support for the project. That ultimately, I think, is where the rubber hits the road. If you believe you have a consensus, if people are willing to stand up for the products of your planning process. We've been successful that way. I think also, if you take a look at it, the community is involved. As I said, we only could get Star City and the city of Morgantown to come into our joint process. All the other municipalities in the county did their own comprehensive plans while they were watching us do our process. They are all now willing to join into our process. And we did not hire our transportation plan from those communities because they weren't participating in the comprehensive plans. We still incorporated them as much as we could into our process. And I think those are where you see consensus develop. It's one of those things you kind of feel as you work with people. So.
Thank you. So let's talk about the pandemic. Obviously, the show must go on. Planning still happens. How do we engage our community when we can't meet in person right now? And I would also like to add then a second follow-up question to that. Assuming that the majority of it would be online, how do we deal with the digital divide, the disparities for those that don't have access to computers, to internet, to a phone with internet? So I guess question one, just how do we deal? What are some techniques? And then two, how do we deal with, like I said, that digital divide?
Well, just from my experience, the West Virginia Department of Transportation Division of Highways has had a couple of public meetings for fairly controversial projects online where they did a presentation and they received comments, and they also publicized it. The response was surprisingly strong. We had 25 to 35 people participating at one time or another, as well as showing over 100 people logging in. Now, those can be multiple logins and so forth. It's hard to determine that, but to this point, Federal Highways and the Division of Highways feel the process has been fairly successful. So on an individual project level, I think you can approach it that way, but there is a real question for underserved communities who are not likely to have access to more than a cell phone, smartphone, and participating in those kinds of processes is difficult from that end. They do have online forms you can fill out and surveys and all of that, but getting the kind of buy-in and outreach that we got with our Crossroads effort and hope to get in our future efforts, I still think is very difficult. I also have a question from the technical end of it is, we're going to be doing a transportation plan update. We rely on traffic counts and transit ridership, and how reliable is even that data going to be in at least the near term. So that's another technical aspect that I have a question about the pandemic itself. The outreach process, we're calling an RFQ for innovative means to address it. And I hope somebody smarter than I can come up with better ideas for that. MapQuest and those kind of technologies have worked well, but I still have a question if people really understand what we're talking about. They seem to play like a video game. So it is an open-ended question to me, but I can see that there are ways to progress.
Neil or Ron, do you have any comments?
Oh, yes, I just posted some. The digital divide has been a problem both for unprofitable urban areas and equally and maybe more unprofitable rural areas. A couple regional agencies have actually become the hardwired service provider. That's long-term, of course, but can do things like organizing. They're very good here in Athens, Georgia, the libraries with computer, computer terminals that can be organized to invite people to come there or other community centers while we work on the longer term access. I question it because I was on one of those MetroQuest webinars last week, and they were claiming we've got 90% access. I don't think it's nearly that good for our whole population, but it is improving. I did a lot of television forums back in the up through the 90s, and even TV was only 75%. So we've never been able to reach everybody. Is one other thing. I mean, some of the projects that like the Chicago Regional Plan, we actually were able to get some of the community centers, retirement communities, places like that that have vans and actually run around and do pickups in some of those underserved neighborhoods and bring them to access points like the library. It takes some time and organizing, but it's worth doing.
It's very much worth doing, and we did enlist the aid of the transit agency in facilitating people getting to our public meetings. I guess for the more novice practitioner, I'll give an example of how these techniques really can work. When I was a young planner, a couple of years ago, we had a public meeting on a very controversial project. It was a TV call-in talk show, which was actually, this was in the 90s. It was pretty cutting edge back then. And the project had just fired up the public's imagination. And it really turned out to be 3 or 4 property owners within the project area. And we had this call in, and we had a Department of Transportation engineer who was trying to hog the time, but we finally took some phone calls. And we got a comment from one of the property owners. And the project was called Cook Road. And the caller said, you know, I'm not really opposed to the project, but I live near Cook Road. And every time I hear that name, it just, excuse the phrase, pisses me off. And I just hate the name Cook Road. And we changed the project name to the Western Alamance Loop, and he disappeared, as did most of the property owners who were complaining about the project. Labels mean a lot, and even though you're not addressing the actual project itself, people understanding how they're being impacted can be identified clearly by the labels. So listening to the public and coming up with ideas that address their concerns, even if it is, in your mind, pro forma, like changing the name of a project. It's important to these folks that they need to be heard, and it's important that we hear them and respond to them.
Yeah, I'll just add too, sometimes you have to go back to the old ways. I mean, some areas, if they don't have the broadband and other access, you may have to do some mailings, dare I say it. If that's the only option, whether it's newsletter or letter update, or I know we had to change some of our means of communication reverting back because of the issue. So if that's what is necessary in your particular local community, you do that and look and talk to others, and how are other organizations communicating, and that's going to be a good indication, the best way for you to communicate as well. I'm amazed by what people think of, a lot of these groups and how they how they stay in touch and whatnot, and learn from others as well.
All right, I need you to whip out your crystal balls, gentlemen, and tell me, do we think that things like the Zooms, the GoToWebinars, you know, whatever, the digital platform, after we assume the age of COVID ends, will this be a norm instead of the exception? Or do you all think that we'll just go right back to in-person participation and engagement, or will it be a hybrid?
I would believe a hybrid. I think that we're not going to escape this. I think a lot of folks, I heard an estimate that maybe up to 20% of folks will be working from home, whereas prior to COVID, it was 5% or less. And so people are going to become normalized to this type of approach. But I don't think you can have as an effective outreach program as you do with in-person appearances and being able to respond to questions one-on-one or to address the public. So I really see it as a hybrid approach. And I think Neil's right. The older methods, while not reaching the largest population that you can get, may be appropriate just because of access issues. I showed you Montague County. Most of that's rural with poor internet access. And the county's working on a broadband initiative, but even then, you can't make people go to your website, and it's hard to attract people to your website. So there's no guarantee there. When I first took a public involvement class from Federal Highways, they told the story about California DOT had a hard time getting people out to their long-range transportation plan meetings. People just wouldn't show up. So they went out and they put survey stakes in people's yards, and then they announced a public meeting on transportation. And they got an amazing turnout. How it particularly affects you is what's going to drive our participation, and getting that message across to people is the key. I don't recommend putting survey stakes in people's yards, but it did bolster turnout.
Yeah, I think it will be a hybrid as well. I think there's going to be some difficulties that are going to arise that even weren't there before. You know, I mentioned before about the trust. At least with when you have face-to-face meetings, you can have more of that direct. You can read how people are reacting and adjust accordingly, and that's really hard to do online, and particularly in today's world of where you know, social media and whatnot, where people can make comments and not be facing that person, or it's almost, you know, you're distant. And how much of that is going to spill over into public comment that, well, I'm not there and they don't, you know, I'm going to say what I want, or not maybe be as civil as they would otherwise. So, you know, just like there's ground rules when you have a face-to-face meeting, you have to be careful to have ground rules for other types of input and interaction as well.
Yeah, Neil, I was going to mention that too. In my house, we call them the keyboard warriors, where, you know, they just kind of either say what they feel, or, you know, just it's an outlet. And on a recent webcast, we had a more in-depth conversation about this, and how do you kind of weed out those comments and not sort of, you know, include them in the, I guess, the general feel of whatever it is that you're discussing, you know, being able to know what's sort of just that keyboard warrior versus someone with an honest complaint or criticism or whatever it might be. So
if I can, I just want to add one
yeah,
thing,
sure.
piggyback on something Bill said. When I do a lot of my programs, different times I'll use acronyms because it gets people thinking or whatever. And of course, about everybody's heard of the NIMBY, the not in my backyard. One I like to use is another type of NIMBY, but this one, instead of NIMBY, it's NIMBI. Now I must become involved. And that's, I think you're right. That's when people, when those stakes are out there, when like the earth is being moved or the neighbor tells them, oh, did you hear what they're doing and out behind us here? Then people are like, oh, wait a minute. Where's the meeting at? Where's the town hall at? Where can I get there? And that's how to get to that point in an appropriate manner is one of the difficulties. But I think that's where I think pictures are extremely effective. So many people, if you give them words or give them something to read, but if you show them what your area could look like or what the impacts could be, I think that really has a big impact on people as well, versus just hearing there's a meeting. But if they see something, they'll think of that image and then be more willing to put their time in and go out and provide some feedback.
Yeah, could I jump in with a comment? People are familiar. Daniel Yankelovich passed away a couple years ago, but he's the pollster that got really interested in direct engagement, and he and a number of colleagues developed a process they call dialogue, which is basically just talking until you're ready to go to work. I had friends working between the county and Indian tribes in Washington State, and they'd sit down and dialogue for a whole year before they'd even put a planning agenda on the table. Because one of the things I think that is the biggest challenge for all of us trying to engage the public in these public projects like planning and transportation and everything is the time limitation. As one, I think Neil might have mentioned, building trust, and that takes time. And I must say, when you go out there for a well-planned, well-intentioned, authentic public engagement process, people often are going to show up with maybe 5 years of anger, having been disregarded by other agencies or other units of government. So take a look at, it's called The Magic of Dialogues, a good kind of introduction to that approach, although a lot of times our time planning constraints are a real limit.
Next question. This is a good one. How do we engage our youth?
What was that?
How do we engage our youth?
How what? I've got bad audio.
How do we engage our youth?
I think one of, was it Neil, that went to high school? We've been doing, we meaning my colleagues and I, started doing high school where, like you did, Neil, I think asked the same questions all the way back to the 80s. And also in setting up, the other thing I haven't heard much talk about in the last couple of years in public engagement webinars and conferences is where the whole thing of setting up some kind of advisory steering committee for the project, not the planning commission, stands. In Chicago, we had a couple high school students selected that were on our steering committee, not just for the workshop activity.
I had a good friend who was very strong in public involvement, and she had an interesting technique that actually worked very well, and it really worked best for the whole community. If you are able to get into an elementary school or a middle school and identify a planning issue or planning project, in this instance, I think they were looking at developing a new road, and you start talking about, gee, where would this road go, or how would this road impact you? And you give the student a work task to go home as homework and talk to mom and dad about the new road. Where should that road go? Or another issue along those lines, you can do it with land use plans. Where should the new candy store go? and actually use the youth to involve the whole community, including their parents, into the issue. And that was a successful technique on several projects that she worked on in North Carolina. But that is one of those things that takes a lot of effort in getting into the community and understanding where you're coming from. But that is one technique and it's an old school technique that you can use to involve youth.
Yeah,
it's a difficult question.
Yeah, I'll just add, at Penn State, we have a professor who deals in intergenerational issues, and he's got some really good information on his website, and he's, again, all different generations. But one of the things he often would say is the youth will become involved when they feel they're actually being heard or they're making a difference. I think that I always remember, because it's one thing to say, hey, we want you to come to this meeting, and if they're looked at like, okay, let's move on, not only is that going to hurt that particular project, and if they feel their input is being given, good chance they're not going to be involved when they're adults as well, if that's their first experience. So again, I can share the website, or Matt Kaplan is his name. He's, again, you could look through Penn State on for his information. Has a number of different articles and booklets out.
Okay, I think we might have time for one more question. Why should policymakers care about the public perception of plans?
Because they're the ones that will bear the brunt of any negative reaction. They need to have a good feel. I had a politician say to me the other day that this issue is not going to get me elected or unelected. But there are issues out there, especially dealing in transportation, that you can't have that kind of impact. And so having the politician understand that you're really talking to their constituents is the key point there. And doing public involvement well, they will understand that.
Yeah, and just going through the process.
One of the positive things, I think, is that I've having experienced it with my own teams and seen colleagues do it. I've always said that the participatory public planning process is the best fulfillment of democracy. I think we've been a real laboratory in urban planning and in fostering engagement, and I just hope we can continue and not let it all go on the web or be kind of one-off survey work. There's other stories I can tell about colleagues having gotten into some pretty heated arguments with their elected officials about whether we live in a representative republic or a participatory democracy. I've been one to always say it's both and, not either or.
I would second that opinion.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I think maybe we can squeeze in one more question. Have any of you used engagement platforms like Co-Urbanize or Place Speak? And I think maybe it was Ron, someone here in the comments had typed in a couple other of those types of platforms. So how, a lot of times they can cost. So how do we justify including them?
We used it for the development of our bicycle and pedestrian plan. We found that the response was typically pretty good, but it was as you would expect, and the primary concern I have with a lot of these, it was by the dedicated community, the dedicated cyclist and pedestrian community. And it was dominated by those groups. You would hear some from other groups, but those folks with the interest will be the ones that show up first. And that's one reason that actual physical participation is more important to help those, for example, the underserved who may be impacted, understand that it is their issue, not just some guy in spandex's issue. Sorry, that was a little typecasting there, and I have a large number of friends in the cycling community, so I'm sure I'll hear about that as well. But they do work, but you have to look at being dominated by one particular interest group with those platforms.
Another set of tools, and I can send you the link. I did an online newsletter for the regional division up until about 2014 when I got busy. But we did an issue, I think in 2013, on some of the scenario interactive face-to-face tools like Community Viz. I think they're tremendously powerful, and Community Viz, for instance, with its foundation sponsorship, is pretty affordable to a planning agency. So I think some of those modeling tools that can actually almost at real time take a bunch of opinions and illustrate on a map and GIS the implications of certain choices are just terrific tools.
Okay, we got to wrap up. Thank you to Bill and Neil and Ron, even though we can't see you. Thank you.
Thank you.
And this was great. And obviously it's very timely, it's very important. And thanks to the collaboration that's bringing this together, and particularly APA Virginia for hosting today's session. Everyone, remember, you can log your CM credits. Don't forget to do that. 1.5, we're recording the session. We'll have it up on the YouTube channel, and give me a couple minutes and I'll post the slide decks onto our webcast webpage, ohioplanning.org/planningwebcast, and just tap on the prior webcasts tab, and all of our PDF copies will be available there. And I think that's it. So everyone, thanks for joining us. Have a great holiday coming up, and please be safe, and we will talk next time.
Thank you.
Everyone, take care.